You know how some people go on like coffee detoxes or junk food detoxes? I feel at this rate, I almost need to I almost need to go on a glitter detox because I just licked my lips and swallowed a bunch of glitter. That can't be healthy. So to put it lightly, today's video is a struggle. Like, I can't even tell you how much of a struggle this video has been to make. So I started trying to film this back in August, and I probably give it about a dozen takes every month, and I came to the idea that, you know what, it's never gonna feel perfect, I'm never gonna get it 100% right, but it's something I want to put out, so I should just be happy with it and put it out there. And that was a couple of months ago, and we're still here. So I've now tried to narrow it down to a double-sided sheet of paper of notes, and yet here is take number 12. So I don't know why this is so difficult to talk about. It is something that's very personal, but it's something I also want to share more for kind of like educational purposes, kind of putting it out there per se. So it shouldn't be that hard. To kind of sum up this story, in January I said my year started a little bit slower than I was anticipating, and that was because I woke up on New Year's with my entire mouth full and I had a hard time swallowing, had a hard time talking, like it was just awful. And I said I would explain why that was, and so that's what this video really is. It's got some fancy Latin terms, so forgive me as I read off my paper, but it's called Morsicatio Baccarum, Morsicatio labiorum, and Morsicatio linguarum, which is essentially fancy terms for chronic inner lip, cheek, and tongue biting, chewing, or nibbling. So it's said that this is a very common thing amongst people. The statistic they have is 1 in 800 people have it. How accurate that is, I don't know, but it has many different causes. So just to name a couple before we get into the one that I'm really focusing on, something called glass blowing per se is one of the big causes, and it's where you have some per se like an occupation or maybe a hobby where you're constantly making that face where you have to suck in or breathe out in like a small kind of area, so you make that face. And as you consistently do that, your teeth kind of rub up against the insides of your cheeks, and it can cause lesions and abrasions. So that is one cause of it. Another big cause of it too is an altered bite. So essentially you might have teeth that aren't exactly in the right place. Maybe you got dental work done and it's not exactly like a fitting bite for you. And so when you constantly close your mouth per se, you might be biting your tongue by accident, might be biting your cheek by accident. And so that's another cause of it. So that's not what we're going to be focusing on today. I absolutely hate this term, but the cause we are focusing on is more self-mutilation. And I hate that term because it's so ugly, but I guess essentially if you were to sum it up, that's what it is. So I don't do this for kicks. I don't do it for fun. It was something that I've done since I was little. So someone in therapy tried to explain it to me that it was probably something along the lines of you used to bite your tongue when you were upset or anxious when you were younger. So they're like, it kind of brings to mind that whole phrase of if you have something to say and somebody says you shouldn't, you should just bite your tongue, and it was something you did that kind of transformed into a chronic bad habit. So how accurate and true that is for me personally, I don't know. It makes sense, but my childhood was so long ago that I can't tell you exactly where this stemmed from, but it's a good guess in my mind. However, unfortunately, it's something that I've done consistently since I was younger. So if I get anxious, if I get upset, I've started even doing it when I get sick. The worst one now is when I drink. I've noticed that I started doing it consistently too. So it's almost like something that's progressing and getting worse and worse and worse. So I find myself in more situations that this is kind of like the coping mechanism I go to. It is something that they say for most people, it is a conscious habit. You'll be aware that you're doing it, though you might not be aware of the damage you do until, unfortunately, what is done is done. However, for some people, it is subconscious, and for me, that's what it's kind of transitioned into. It was something I was aware of before, but because I've done it so much now, it's almost like an ingrained subconscious habit. So what exactly does it look like? Like how can I kind of, for somebody who doesn't go through it, the best way I can describe it. So physically what you'll see is sometimes you'll see ridges along the inside of somebody's cheek, and that's essentially like scarring per se. So it's just constant abrasion, constant lesion. Eventually your skin will build up like a scar. You might also have kind of like indentations along the sides of your tongue or on the inside of your mouth from the constant biting also as well. However, that's more of a long-term effect, where the short-term effect, you'll basically notice it as kind of like shreddy, flaky, not really flaky because it's wet. So I guess shredded kind of skin on the inside of your mouth that has like a whitish hue to it. Often, I would say almost majority of the time, is also alongside redness or ulcers. The biggest abrasion in your mouth, like the one you tend to focus on the most, is typically the one that tends to form the ulcer, and then you kind of get the shredding around it as well as the redness. It's just the way the mouth heals itself. Now that kind of brings me into my next kind of portion that I wanted to talk about. Essentially, these abrasions and lesions, they're harmless. However, depending how they heal, that's where some of the, like, what's the word I'm looking for, complications can come from. So it's just like a little wound on the inside of your mouth. It's harmless. It's not going to grow to anything. It's not going to turn into something evil many years down the road per se, but what can happen is, depending where it's situated, I only know this from personal experience, but I had one situated right where the inner part of my lip touches my teeth and my gums, and it took 28 days for this to heal, because every time I would move my mouth, that ulcer would catch on the skin on the inside and it would actually rip it off and it would have to reform. Eventually it got to the point that I was consistently doing this that it actually ended up getting infected and I had to go to the doctor for help. So as much as the wound itself is harmless, it can cause complications. It also can cause some long-term side effects as well, and that is something that I have also been recently finding out. So back in November, I got really bad tooth pain, and that's because the front teeth I have here that I would use to kind of chew on the inner parts of my lip, or maybe the tips of my tongue per se, it wore away the enamel, and it started kind of exposing some of the roots per se of my tooth. So I had to go to the dentist being like, what's wrong? And they had to put like a new coating on top of my tooth to kind of cover it up and protect it. If you were also here at the beginning of this month and the end of last month, I was complaining about more tooth pain and how I had to go to the dentist, and I was really scared about it. And that was because my back tooth got so bad that it would actually wake me up in the middle of the night. Like I couldn't do anything with it. Even breathing outside in the cold air was hurting it. And this one is a little bit more of like little things that led up to something bad, not just one thing, but it's kind of showing you like what can happen. I had a filling on my back tooth, and from the constant grinding, I also grind my teeth at night, but also from the grinding from chewing on the sides of my mouth and on the sides of my tongue, it kind of wore away the strength of my filling that I had, and eventually it caused my filling to fall out. After that, I have very sharp canine teeth, so they have little points on them, and after that filling wore away, those points were stabbing into my actual tooth, and it broke off a chunk of my tooth. So essentially when I went to the dentist, they were like, it's almost like I caved out the inside of my tooth. Like when you get a cavity filled, they have to clean it out and then they fill it. He was like joking with me, and he's like, it's like you pre-scooped out the inside of your tooth for us, which is really gross, but thank you for him for trying to put a little bit of humor in it for me. So that's just showing you some complications you can get long-term. You don't really think of it as you're doing it because, you know, especially even when you're healing, your mind is on the tissue that you damaged and not on the tools you used to cause that damage. So there are some long-term side effects, and unfortunately it feels like I'm learning this all at once. But at least if this is something that you also do, hopefully I can provide this information to you, and maybe we can try and learn and fix our habits together, and hopefully before they turn into anything bad for you. So saying that, I'm just going to read my notes quickly. I think that was pretty much everything I had to talk about in terms of what it was. Now, to try and hopefully fill you with some hope before I end this, is what can you do about it? Well, number one, if your bite is off, if you're having tooth pain at all, I know Amanda wrote it in my comment section on the video that I was talking about my tooth pain, just go to the dentist. It's one of those things that you'd rather fix right away before it gets worse and worse. If I would have put it off more, he was telling me that the strength of my tooth was starting to be weakened and it could have caused bigger chips, and essentially at that point you might have to get a root canal because you damage the roots on the inside, and then you have to get a crown to cover it. And he said, unfortunately, with some people, if your damage is so bad on your tooth, you might actually have to get your tooth pulled. So I don't ever want that to happen. So that is one thing. If you do feel tooth pain, please go get it checked out. Another thing you can do is a retainer. So it doesn't help really get rid of the bad habit per se, but it can help kind of put like a softening or like a safety mat per se for your teeth and your mouth. So when you go to grind your teeth, you're grinding it against plastic, which can still cause damage, but it's not going to cause it as bad and not as like all at once. It more be like an abrasion. It'd be the constant rubbing and the constant squishing as opposed to like stabbing and chewing. The best and most successful way to kind of get over this bad habit is to either replace your bad habit or to relearn it. And I hate saying that because I'm one of those people, when I'm sad, I've had people come up to me and just tell me to cheer up. And so to sit here and be like, oh, the best thing you can do if you have a bad habit of chewing your cheek is just don't chew it anymore. Like, it seems like such a comment, but unfortunately, being real, that's the best thing you can do, is to relearn it or to get rid of it. So for example, it would be like chewing on a pen per se instead of chewing on your mouth. So it's still going to be bad for your teeth, but you've taken out that evil of causing wounds and lesions in your mouth. Then after maybe you're done, like maybe you've kind of mastered that, you can move on to just chewing gum per se. Maybe that's something that works for you, and essentially that's a lot better than chewing your mouth and chewing a pen. Or some people are like, you know what, I'll try, instead of doing this when I'm anxious, I will tap. I don't know, I'm not good at replacing habits because clearly I still have my bad habits, but ideally if you're stressed or you're anxious, you're like, oh, instead of doing my bad habit, I want to go for a walk. Like completely changing it up. But that's essentially the best thing you can do, is relearn and replace your habits. It's going to be a long change and a long kind of recovery of changing a bad habit, but consistency is key. Keep up with it. If you fail, it's like everything else. Practice makes perfect. Just keep going. And I am the worst person to give you that advice because clearly I'm here making this video. So, but you know what? Putting this out there, letting people know what I'm going through, it kind of does give me a little bit of motivation to try and fix it. However, you need to turn that motivation into determination, because motivation is emotionally driven and we all know emotions fluctuate. So yeah, there's me lecturing you on motivation and determination. But that's everything I have to say. Now, for my sake, I will say I know there's a ton more information out there on this. There's a lot more causes about things. There's probably a lot more treatments you can do for things. This was basically my way of taking my rambly thoughts and trying to actually put it out there for not just a video for you, but a video for me to kind of get this off my chest as well. I don't know, leave some love down below if you feel like commenting, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.